I really can't touch the wind. No, you can't.
Yo, what's happening, my ninjas? Welcome back to yet another episode of the Wind Clan Ninjas Book of Wind mini-series. Alright, so today we are moving into familiar territory. Talking about surface wind, we're getting on through this thing. Alright, but before all that, make sure you stop by our Patreon page, patreon.com/WindClanNinjas. And go ahead and grab up some of those rewards, to help support the show. Alright, Scratching the Surface, Chapter 3. You probably won't have a single instance where you're affected directly by solar or planetary wind. So I can understand if you don't particularly give a fuck about them. I personally thought that was some interesting shit since we typically only think about wind being something we have here on Earth. So since you're so gosh darn in love with surface wind, we're gonna go into excruciating depth about how it functions and how it affects us directly. Congratulations, motherfucker. First of all, let's expound on the answer to the question from earlier. Where does wind come from? We've already established that wind is just air in motion, so the real question is, what gets it moving? Air typically moves as a result of a difference in air pressure. Air moves from an area of greater air pressure to an area of less pressure. It's like when you squeeze one end of one of those long balloons clowns use to make poodles and shit. You've increased the air pressure inside the balloon on the end you're squeezing, so all the air moves to the end that you're not squeezing. And you've probably guessed, there's not a huge hand squeezing the earth like a giant poodle balloon. Pressure changes in the world at large are most commonly caused by temperature differences. The most obvious and largest temperature difference on Earth is that between the frozen poles and the smoldering hot equator. That's why so many storms start in the tropics. Well, that combined with the other major source of surface wind, the Earth's rotation. Naturally, the equator is where the most spinning is going on because it's at the center. That's just main sources of wind. As you well know, wind can be caused by something as simple as cracking a door open just a bit. That little breeze that rushes in is due to the lower air pressure inside sucking in air from outside. Aren't you glad that mystery's finally solved? It's funny how no matter what the size or scope of the force, everything in this world is constantly trying to reach equilibrium or balance. That's why air moves from high pressure area to the low pressure area. It's just trying to even things out. Even something as complicated and abstract as love follows this pattern. You ever heard how they say the person who cares least dominates the relationship? That's because when one partner seems to be showing less interest, the other overcompensates in an attempt to get their lover to reciprocate their feelings. This isn't some shit that just started happening. It's been like that for ages. That may be exactly why we can't see God, and some people aren't even sure he's there. According to the stories, who loves us more than him? It seems like back in the Old Testament days, God used to talk to people and send angels to appear before them all the time. I remember him even walking through the Garden of Eden one time near the beginning of the Bible. Well, back when he was all out in the open and leaping at every bump and bruise the first man and woman got, you know how they repaid him? This bitch was talking to snakes and man listened to his woman who he hadn't even known for all of a week or so over the word of his creator. Not to mention that one time God came to earth in the form of Jesus, fed all these people and got them drunk for free. Then they hung him up on the cross and beat and stabbed him to death. Fast forward to the future, We can't see God, and some people aren't even sure he exists since they've never heard or seen him. And yet you have people fighting entire wars over their love and obsession of God. Now that's a guy who has this love thing figured out. Millions of people obsessed with him, and he has yet to show up in person for even one of his weekly shows. In case you haven't heard, he's booked every Sunday at every church in the world. When you're nowhere at any time, you can be everywhere at one time. Somehow, when you're absent, those that love you will blame themselves for not being good enough instead of blaming you for not intervening. Absolute genius. All right, let's pause right there real quick. That's a deep sentiment right there. They always say, absence makes the heart grow fonder. And I mean, it's awful convenient, to just be able to say, oh, I haven't seen you guys, so he must not be there. But that's the purpose of this book overall. There's all sorts of things that we don't physically see with our eyes that we're absolutely certain is there, like the wind itself. I mean, most people listening to this right now probably have never seen $1 million sitting in front of them, or in their account or anything like that. So how do you know it even exists? Well, because people talk about it on the news and different celebs and whoever else because they say their net worth is this, that, and the other. You don't have any proof. You haven't touched it or looked at it yourself, but you're sure it's there. And then, so a lot of times what's real, like we said earlier in the book, is based solely around what, what evidence is lingering around from the thing, not necessarily the thing itself. Like, it's like the fossils of a dinosaur. We didn't see them walk the earth, but there's fossils, so who knows? It could have just been some little bone creatures walking around for all we know, just some like bone shits that laid down in the mud and got stuck there. They never were like big dinosaurs or anything. I don't know. I'm just putting it out there. Just putting it out there. Anything's possible. All right, moving right along. The applications for this balance of forces are many. Just like the mortal guide the mortal, the educated pass knowledge to the less educated, the happy try to cheer up the sad, the healthy heal the sick. But the most interesting thing about it all is that I don't even think most, if any of these things can ever truly reach equilibrium. If everything in this world suddenly became balanced, it'd just all come to a screeching halt. I mean, look at the thing with the equator and the poles. If the poles and the equator ever became the same temperature, the entire Earth would flood. Without a constant push-pull relationship of forces, things just get stagnant and stop. This is exactly why wind is everywhere and will always be around. That's the closest thing we can comprehend to immortality. It helps us better process the idea of something being around forever and having been around forever. Your mind blown yet? Alright, well, let that process for a second. We're gonna go ahead and play a little bit of music. I'm feeling a little anxious to hear something real quick. I'll be right back.
Now playing First Name Last Name by Bosswood.
Buy squad bad money shit. Boss. I'm back up in the spot and I'm ready for more to combat. Looking for a target that I can point out and launch at. Ain't that smart for coming where I be hunting at. I'ma take that artery where the blood get pumped at. Feed it to my canine companion and make her sit for me. They ain't the only bitch that I'm training to do a trick for me. All I do is pump with my fingers and I say six something. Running through them pockets, that's how I was taught to lick something. I'm in the field like a bale of cotton. I'm too hot. Going underground with Harriet Tubman and Cool Light. All of them that been making up rules get ruled out. Name a nigga that can take me to school. School's out. I'ma beat him like a bullet by the flagpole. I pledge allegiance to being a true asshole. I remember days Mathis when the heater was the gas stove. Now I'm calling pyro for the beat to put that gas on. You don't understand, I got a plan for this shit. We can rent a van to expand and get rich. All these hoes mad, get your hands off my I'm not a fan of trying to smash something quick. All I do is work and go home and get my bars up. Take a couple homework assignments, play with they mama. Waiting on my cellular phone to get back charged up. Then I'm back to looking for rappers who wanna start something. I done gave out more tombstones than Undertaker. They take the greatest rappers alive and underrate them. You rappers ain't my size, they underweigh them. This how you look a bull in the eyes and underlay them. That 5 squad fad money, all us 40 Glock, every hand count of 3, all bust 30 clip. That's it, make a flick, y'all. Tell whoever on that side still alive, that was luck, bitch. I'm still on the air. Pick a track and have a blast, tell them shoot me. Who still doing bad? Boy, that paper come in bags like it's loose leaf. Take a look at all these fans who embracing who I am. You sleep. My first name Sam, last name what I lay inside your boo sheets. I'm back up in this bitch like I majored in gynecology. Shooting for the stars, therefore they studied astrology. I was talking even before accepting apologies. I was 17 when I started taking my own shots. I was 23 when I started bringing them goals out. I was 26 when I started taking them loans out. So in my near future, I'm looking for shit to own now. Put me in the game, my nigga. We going virtual. Better mind your business before I come make it personal. Cut through your abdominal tissue, this shit is surgical. Have it where your mama tell people she never heard of you. I'ma take this limited dream and make it life-size. Wanna see me deceased, I tell them likewise. If I see you throwing a piece, that's the alright sign. If you see me throwing a piece, I'm dodging lifetime. You don't want no smoke. Gassed up, hope you choke. Then what happen when you vigorously provoke me? Fuck a rapper, in yellow oak. We gon' see if them Florida Gators let you float. We go super hard in the paint. Beast mode, a Marshawn on that drink. Keep and large funds in that bank. Reload, this 5 squad, what you think? I'm still on the air. Pick a track and have a blast, tell them shoot me. Who still doing bad? Boy, that paper come in bags like it's loose leaf. Take a look at all these fans who embracing who I am. You sleep. My first name Sam, last name what I lay inside your boo sheets.
Alright, so if you're just now joining us, I am C Win with the Win Clan Ninjas podcast, Book of Win mini-series. The Book of Win by Stavario C. Win Wyndham is available on Amazon.com and all other online digital book retailers. Oh yeah, make sure you support our Patreon page, patreon.com/Win Clan Ninjas. Alright, jumping right back into it. Alright. Just like these other forces and balances we talked about, sometimes we get wind in small doses. Sometimes we get it in big old fat doses. Sometimes it wafts by softly, and sometimes it hits us hard. It can come from this way or 2 ways at once, which can cause all kinds of trouble. All these factors are taken into account when man tries to quantify or measure something as wild and seemingly unpredictable as wind. Wind is given several different names, usually based on the strength and duration of the wind's movement. Gusts are quick bursts that only last a few seconds. Squalls blow for about a minute at average strength. There are all sorts of names ranging from gentle breezes to powerful storms. These winds can travel from north to south, east to west, or directions in between. The unit of measurement for wind is called knots, K-N-O-T-S. And I have absolutely no intention of going into that boring shit right now. It's called knots because it's called knots, as far as I'm concerned. But what I will tell you is this. The way wind is measured derives from watching conditions of the sea. Waves are one of the easiest ways to watch the results of wind in motion. Sailors have always depended on the wind and the information they derive from reading these patterns in order to harness the wind and sail to their destination. Now, when you start talking about storms, you go into an entirely different set of scales and measurements. You ever heard them talk about an F5 tornado? That F in there stands for Fujita, which is a Japanese word. Notice the fu in there? Fu is wind, fool. This scale takes into account One more factor that we didn't mention earlier, destructive force. An F1 tornado comes and goes, while an F5 fucks everything up. F5s are the ones that murder people and houses. When strong winds of varying conditions converge and collide, you get a big mess. That's when you get the type of chaos that a tornado represents. That isn't very unlike what happens when people with strong varying beliefs and ways of thought encounter one another. Sometimes it's just a brisk conversation that results, and sometimes it is an all-out war. The Jews and Palestinians have been fighting over the same one disagreement for like 1,000 years now. That shit is like an F10 with no signs of stopping. It's not just the difference of opinion over a particular real estate matter. Read up on the conflict if you don't understand that particular joke. But additional underlying misunderstandings that feed the storm, just like local winds feeding an already enormous tornado. I won't get too deep into all that, despite how obsessed your generation seems to be with Illuminati stuff. Oh yeah, bet I caught your attention then, huh? A ninja been dragging on and on about all this science shit, and now we get to the good stuff. Man, chill the fuck out. I may get to some of that later, since it is one of those unseen forces that we believe plays a huge role in our society and its conditions. But I wouldn't hold my breath. Hey, speaking of breathing, creatures and environment. So we're gonna do 2 today because the last one was a little short. So we're gonna go ahead and jump right into the next chapter, chapter 4. All right. My. You must have been the life of the party within your circle, having something go in and out of your mouth every day, whether you're awake or sleeping, and you never even stop to think why or how. It's just one of those things that have always happened and that you can't seem to live without. We are talking about breathing. We are talking about your own little supply of wind, on which you depend and are even able to control to a certain extent. Wait, what did you think we were talking about? Pervert, I'm just playing. What about the other stuff? The wind, we don't have so much control over. The kind that has the power to change our entire environment and landscape? Or how about the kind that can spread life or even take it? Yes, we often take for granted the things we can't see, and those things that seem to have always been around. But those very same things have a way of making their existence known, either by disappearing altogether or showing up with extreme force. Air goes from barely there to the top of the priorities list when you suddenly can't breathe, or when that gentle breeze suddenly becomes an F5 twister tearing through your town. Whether it's in the places we want it or gets into places we don't, we deal with air on a constant basis, and it's the movement of which that helps facilitate the type of change represented by life and death. Life moves in, life moves out, like one short breath. From the moment we slide out from our mama's stuff or come bursting from an open gash in their bellies, we begin our personal relationship with wind. The doctor slaps us on our ass and sucks that goop out of our noses, and we're anchored to this element for the rest of our natural lives. There are organisms in our world that don't breathe air and instead filter oxygen from water using gills. There are even organisms that don't technically breathe at all, like anaerobic bacteria that grow and survive in entirely airless environments. But we, just like the other land animals and even a few creatures in the sea, have lungs with which to filter out oxygen from the air itself. As we leave the womb, our lungs devoid themselves of the oxygen-filled fluid which trained our lungs to do their jobs. With a sudden difference in air pressure created by this newly empty space, we are introduced to our first dose of wind. It rushes down our windpipe and into the lungs where, in a matter of seconds, oxygen is absorbed into the bloodstream and is replaced with carbon dioxide that is quickly expelled with a wail as it passes our fresh vocal cords and lets the world know we are alive. An area of the brain near the base where the neck meets the skull makes sure this process repeats whether or not you're conscious of it happening, along with keeping your heart beating and your eyes blinking. At some point, After we've gotten a handle on the myriad of functions and controls we have in this mysterious body of ours, our mind is suddenly free of enough distraction to become conscious of itself. We eventually realize that we can control the loud sounds that escape from our mouths in such a way that makes our much larger caregivers leap into action and give us attention. Then, through some marvelous development, we learn to do all sorts of useful things with this same exact force. Sipping juice through a straw and blowing bubbles, puffing our cheeks up to make faces and noises that make those around us giggle. We even learn that we can stop our breath altogether for a small period of time until a harsh reality sets in. After our air is cut off for long enough, that little area of the brain forces us to breathe once more with a deep gasp or a cough. The little brain area knows even better than we that without constantly replacing the air in our lungs, we will die. From that point on, wind is forever tied to our mortality. It becomes a constant reminder of how thin the line between death and life really are. We can practically bring the dead back to life with our breath when performing CPR. We can survive months without food, weeks without water, but only a matter of minutes without air. More specifically, the wind we create as our lungs repeat that process we initiated at birth, changing air pressure by expanding and contracting, whether we tell them to or not. Every creature with lungs is aware of this relationship and will fight to uphold his pack between air and life. Whales and dolphins dive deep in the sea and instinctively rise to the surface to take a breath. Their instincts are so strong in this regard that they even cater to it as the animal sleeps. There are so many forces protecting us and keeping us alive, whether or not we even know they are there. It almost makes you wonder, if we can still survive without knowing how we breathe, what's the point in learning? If an atheist's heart will continue to beat, whether or not he believes in God, what is the purpose of knowing of his existence? Whether or not you know you have to breathe, you will, and you will continue to be alive. But when you know how to breathe, that's when you can start blowing bubbles. That's when you can swim underwater without immediately drowning. That's when you truly begin to live. That's when you take control and realize that you can decide for yourself how and when you die. If they wanted, the religious could argue that belief is like our spiritual breath, drawing the line between eternity and oblivion as opposed to the line between mortal life and death like our physical breath. If we choose to hold our spiritual breath and choose not to believe for long enough, will some little part of our existence automatically force us back into belief for the sake of our eternal souls? I suppose the only way to know would be to hold your breath. Alright, so on that note, we're going to go ahead and play a little bit more music. Allow that to process. I'll be back.
Now playing Energy Ball by Wind Clan.
Initiating new body sequence.
Fresh off the mother chipping into the dojo. Neo Tokyo, let's ride. Appearing nearer than the objects in the mirror of your rear view. Holler so I hear you. We gotta put some energy to take on the enemy, y'all. Make an energy ball. Get hyped, get excited till the enemy falls. So when the smoke clears out, I want you to follow me like a bus ride. My name on, nigga, cuss out. Ride a bus driver. Let the pressure build till you bust out. And it's
All right, and we're back to the Book of Wind podcast mini-series, Wind Clan Ninjas. I am C Wind, aka Stavario C Wind Wyndham, the author of the Book of Wind, and available now on Amazon.com and other digital book retailers. All right, make sure you go stop by their Patreon page if you haven't already. Support us, be able to keep this show going, be able to allow us to keep on providing a platform for artists to be able to submit their music and be heard and distributed and all that good stuff that we want so badly. Dawg. All right, moving right along. That's some pretty heavy shit, right? I hate getting too deep and spiritual on you. So to break the tension, here's a conversation about farts, poops, booty bugles, them hot stinky French horns. It is impossible to have a meaningful conversation about wind and biology without mentioning farts. The PC term for it, of course, is flatulence, in case you want to have a meaningful conversation about this with your mom later. It's the result of air building up in your digestive system, either from swallowing it during eating or drinking, or from your stomach being empty. Air has no useful purpose inside that part of your body, so it does whatever it has to get the fuck up out of there. There's only two good ways for it to get out once it's in there, and those are burps and farts. When air and gas build up in the stomach, it can escape back up through the esophagus and out through the mouth. But once it passes the point of no return, i.e. the intestines, it is destined for farts. A combination of muscles in your abdomen and food waste push the air along the digestive path and out through the anus, where these stinky little babies are born. Based on the definition we gave earlier of wind being the mass movement of air particles, farts are no exception, hence the term breaking wind. I'm not entirely certain when exactly farts became funny, but they have been the subject of many a quip throughout time. Maybe it has to do with the embarrassing nature of it and it being a consistent social taboo in modern times. Farts are fun when young men get around each other and compete to see who can roar the loudest. But in fancy social settings, you may as well have announced that you have HIV or the bubonic plague when you fart unexpectedly. The smell is typically unpleasant and at times unbearable. It makes for a not so enjoyable experience for many people on the receiving end of farts, especially in enclosed areas such as elevators. As we get a bit older, we've become so familiar with the inevitability of farts that they're not as funny anymore, especially compared to how die-laughing funny they are when you're in middle school. Around that age, people are so self-conscious that they rarely slip one out in public. So it's like seeing Haley's Comet when someone lets one rip, tearing through the tension of a far too serious school day. As an adult in long-term relationships and the like, if everyone has to fart at some point, you're going to eventually hear one if you're around someone all the time. Unlike breathing, you can't control farts to the same extent, even though there are some people able to suck in air with their butts and fart it out at will. You can hold them in for a while, but once it builds up, there's no way to control the tempest. That storm is coming to shore, and when it does, it will cause devastation to nostrils for yards around, leaving no survivors. While we're on the subject, do you know why farts stink? Any smell is the result of tiny particles from the source of the smell traveling through the air to your nose, where they send signals to your brain to interpret the smell. So when you smell flowers, there are tiny flower pieces floating into your nose. And yes, when you smell a fart, little microscopic pieces of shit are flying up your nose. And don't have your mouth open when it happens. Woo! There's one more reason for you to get offended by farts. When air gets into the wrong places, it can cause all kinds of trouble and discomfort, and farts and burps aren't the only way this happens. On occasion, when using needles and other intravenous instruments, that's what the IV stands for, it means in your veins. Air bubbles can form and be accidentally injected into the bloodstream. The vascular system is far less forgiving of the accidental entry of air than the digestive system is. An air bubble in the veins can travel to the heart or brain and cause a stroke, and very likely death. It is very uncommon and unnatural for air to enter these particular parts of the body. So you can understand why they aren't designed or prepared to handle the introduction of air. Considering the connection previously made between breathing and spiritual belief, you may also be able to draw a comparison between this relationship and the separation of church and state. Our government here in the U.S. has taken great strides to separate religion from the law and public schools. Now, the explicit reasoning given is so the government won't interfere in the religious freedoms and dealings of such churches and organizations. If you ask me, it was intended for the reverse, to keep religion out of the government. You can make whatever inference here in connection to some evil presence in the government that you want, but I'm simply suggesting that maybe the government system isn't designed to process the components carried by the breath of life. In fact, if you're familiar with the films The Amityville Horror and The Haunting in Connecticut, these films are based on reports by the famed paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren. This husband and wife duo was involved in the first ever murder trial, citing demon possession as the cause and motive. For belief to be such an integral part of human society, it rarely has any bearing on the court, and this case was of course lost. You do have the rare occasion like in the Muhammad Ali trial and a similar Jehovah's Witness case where refusal to fight in a war due to religious conviction was an acceptable defense. But for the most part, religion and belief are a shock to this particular system. Most belief systems have a similar code of ethics, at least as it relates to the treatment of fellow human beings. So there'd probably be a whole lot of government staff getting lynched if it were up to the spiritual law. Yeah, I said it. There's one last fun source of biological wind that I want to mention before we move forward, and that source is queefs. Don't ask me the origins of the word, but it is the name commonly associated with vaginal flatulence, typically caused by air trapped up there during sexual intercourse. In other words, a pussy fart. Terrible. It's no surprise how it gets up there, and it isn't a particularly complex process for how it comes back out. But queefs are no different than other sources of air that aren't supposed to be in the body. These air pockets can interrupt the festivities by causing the female physical discomfort, and some women become very embarrassed by it when it escapes. It often doesn't sound much different than a regular fart, so there is the possibility of the partner mistaking one for the other. Trust me, ladies, as long as we don't smell anything funny, most men aren't going to care. That's enough about queefs. Wait, huh? You're going to make me connect queefs to something philosophical before we move on? Too easy. Check me out. All things from which we derive pleasure have a little discomfort or a little misfortune attached to them. It's just like the law of the universe. It's like the Taoist yin and yang. Have you noticed the small white dot in the black half of the circle and the small black dot in the white half? That's to remind you that no matter how much darkness there is, there will always be at least a faint light. And no matter how much light, there will always be a tiny speck of darkness. It's no different than when Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "There was some good in the worst of us and some evil in the best of us." You're always going to get the farts along with the good and plentiful food, and you're always going to get the queefs with the good sex. However, there's also always a lesson to be learned in the worst of situations. Time off to watch your favorite shows when you're homesick, and a settlement check when that rack falls on your foot at Walmart. When you want something bad enough, you'll take the bad with the good, and you can expect a little jealousy when you reap your reward. Sometimes you gotta work through the queefs to get to the nut. And that, my friend, is how you make queefs philosophical. On that note, we're gonna play a little bit of music. Let you digest your queefs. I'll be right back.
now playing Introvert by Coley Raax.
Lost in my head, I'm thinking I love being on my own. I'm just an introvert, alone. I'd rather be left alone. Kill it with this one. Coley just stood in the building. By myself, no security. Don't get no fuck by these niggas. I don't regret none of these bitches. I'm straight by myself in no trenches. Bitch, so pissed off cause I ain't signed yet, but that's another story, never mind that. I tell them fuck about when they try to call with a contract. I thought of not being good enough ran across my conscience. Kept believing in myself and changed my mindset. Got a cute bitch in my face trying to start an argument. Damn, I hate a bitch that like that arguing shit. Plus my daughter watching my move, I don't gon' respond to it. I just take the blame, then play the game like in the corner. Fucking calling my phone, I don't pick up the phone, I press the red button on, too busy to leave me alone, but bad to the bone, smoking my side alone, cause I did this shit alone, ain't nobody else around. Everybody wanna talk about the way that I rap with the K now do. For my daughter, everything, I'ma give it my all. That's all I do. I'm a father at the end of the day, little nigga, just worry about you. I'm the fucking truth. Don't be listening in the mood. This words in my avenue. Lost in my head, I'm thinking I love being on my own. I'm just an introvert, alone. I'd rather be left alone. That's evidential, bitch, to get in the mirror, that's so not G. I step to the side so she can take that bitch without me. So can I take your picture with you? That shit did not like scared. But the nigga who fucked you, he loved you. Yeah, it's perfect time. I say you can deny it, not me. If you go top me, stop me. You can get violent, try me. Run up on me, this your ass, nigga. Try to know me, I'm a blast, nigga. Do this and I'm built to last, nigga. Really asking for the last, nigga. Lost in my head, I'm thinking I love being on my own. I'm just an introvert, alone. I'd rather be left alone. Lost in my head, I'm thinking I love being on my own. I'm just an introvert, alone. I'd rather be left alone. Lost in my head, I'm thinking I love being on my own. I'm just an introvert. Lost in my I love being on my own. I'm just an introvert.
All right, welcome back. I am C Wind of the Wind Clan Ninjas podcast, and you're listening to the Book of Wind mini-series. And if you haven't been with us today, man, you just missed the most philosophical conversational farts and queefs that you'll ever hear in any spiritual text ever. Mind you, I sent this book to the Pope, so I don't know how he reacted when he read this, but all I know is like a week later, him and Obama had a meeting, and I'm not dead, so I'm guessing that went pretty well. Moving right along. All right, so after thoroughly exploring the effects of the wind inside, let's take a gander at how wind affects us from the outside, how it changes us and the environment around us. Collectively, wind changes our world like no other force. If there were no wind, the world would be like a still painting. Yes, it would still be beautiful and have all the color and variety that you love in your favorite work of art. However, once you add wind, the world becomes animated. It becomes a freaking Disney movie. I don't mean modern day with all the technology and 3D shit in Pixar movies, though every single one of them is amazing. I'm talking about Snow White, years of animating using revolutionary techniques that rival even today's animation. That's what wind's like, as it breathes like life into the still world of ours with an elegance that you can't just get anywhere. Placid bodies of water transform into lively dancing pools as waves form in response to blowing winds. Flowers and plants transform from mere decorations to swinging and swaying, living creatures with personalities as the breeze passes through. That's similar to our own bodies, an otherwise still form with the wind of life passing through us and animating us, both literally and figuratively. We would cease to be without wind passing through us. When wind passes through, you notice, and after it's gone, you know it's been there. The landscape has shifted, and the contents of the lake have stirred all around, and the sports section has flown out of your hand, and that woman's new hairdo is now a mess. Sometimes an entire neighborhood is level with roofs torn, smoothed off, and down power lines sparking and shit. Families come together as everything they own has been destroyed. I guess you can't have a Disney movie without Bambi's mom getting shot or Mufasa getting tossed into wildebeest murder. Yes, even Disney has its queefs. That reminds me of a conversation I had with a young woman about tsunamis. She asked, if there's a God, why are there tsunamis and earthquakes and things that cause people pain? My answer for her benefit was something along the lines of, you mean the same God that makes flowers and puppies and all that shit that makes you happy? There are 1,000 answers I could have given to that same effect, but that just happened to be the answer that translated best to someone in her particular situation. Let's look at tsunamis and waves for a minute. Waves are generally created by a combination of strong winds and the movement of Earth, activity below the Earth's surface, or even the moon's gravity. When a wave sizable enough to be called tsunami comes along, it just means that it's the result of a whole lot of wind or a whole lot of movement in the Earth. This has been happening since long before human beings came along. Then, suddenly, some millions of years later, man decides to set up shop in these areas that are near oceans. At first, it's harmless fun, a little fishing here and a little sailing there. Then blam, the first tsunami hits. And the people there have never seen a wave that high and powerful before. Wow, that was strange, they said. Hope we don't see one of those again. A few years later, blow! What a surprise, it's another tsunami. A few thousand years later, these people are still living in this area for whatever reason. But be it that they've grown accustomed to the conditions of the area, or maybe they see it as a sign from the gods. Either way, they're pretty content living right smack in the middle of Tsunamiville. Then, one day in the 1980s, you're born, you grow up and find time in your perfect American life to blame God for or question his existence because people died due to weather conditions that they are familiar with. The irony is that you, as a non-believer, immediately saw the tsunami as a sign that God doesn't exist. In all likelihood, the reason those people were still living in their tsunami-prone island nation was because of their belief in God or gods. Furthermore, seeing the destruction as a reminder to reverence the gods or something. In this way, waves not only change the landscape, but also the way a culture looks at waves. When you depend on the sea for so many things, you'll take the tsunamis with the bountiful catches. Hell, if you're a surfer, tsunamis and huge swells are like gifts from the gods. Yeah, so full disclosure right there, the young lady in that example, I think I mentioned her again later on in the book, but that was my ex-wife. When I met her, she was just in this place. I don't know. I guess she was raised in one of those kind of families that just kind of beat religion into you, you know. And so it just basically turned her off of the whole concept of faith altogether. And she was out living rather wild, you know. And was pretty sure she was on her way to her grave at the time. And so we kind of connected, like those conversations we used to have. And in doing so, like, it's funny, like, the things you learn yourself when you go to explain something to somebody else, and then there's just that concept of, yeah, there's a lot of bad shit that happens in the world, but then for every like bad day you had, like those are the times that you remember. But if you really think about it, like for every bad day that you had, like really genuinely bad day, you've had like 100 good days before that happened. Like everything was straight. Like it was sunny. Oh hell, it's raining tomorrow, and then it doesn't rain again for like some weeks, and then rain. Like that's really how it happens. Like I think we react so much to the bad situations because they're not as common as we expect. You know, it's like rare gems, like gold and things like that, because you don't just run into gold just sitting on the ground all day. Like it's a rare metal, you know what I'm saying? So that's why it's more valuable. And so I think we just put a lot of value into the bad parts of the world and the bad parts of our lives, and we put a lot of energy into them because they are so rare, you know. So well, who knows? All right, moving right along. Waves play as much a role in creating coastal wind as wind plays in creating waves. After all, it makes sense that air would be cooler over water than over land. And we mentioned earlier that differences in temperature create wind. That's pretty much why it's always nice and breezy at the beach. There's a weird concept for you. Something that is caused by wind is also a source of wind. Sounds a lot like that perpetual energy stuff scientists are always going on about searching for. God forbid that idea ever actually became useful to mankind. Whatever will happen to those poor little oil companies? Makes you wonder. This, ladies and gentlemen, is called sarcasm. Staying true to the type of discoveries we've been making so far, I would venture to say this is part of the reason humanity was created, if not the whole reason. A supreme being creates us in his image and able to mimic his qualities such as creativity and compassion, then gives us the ability to freely express this in new ways and create new ways to interpret him and his work. Some people create by drawing, some by lying. Some see the results of wind through the formation of waves, and some from the areas worn down by the crashing waves. Some justify God's existence with our own, while others justifies his existence through his followers. Yeah, that's a deep notion right there. Makes you think, like, cause it's really like a chicken and the egg type of situation, you know, like which came first, the chicken or the egg? And you have people who believe that God created us, and then you have people who believe that we created God. And then what if it was like one of these types of things where they were done in tandem, like we're constantly creating God as he's creating us, you know, like we look at creation based on our standards, like in this world of you know, finite things and mortality, you know what I'm saying? We look at things with a clear beginning and the end. But when you're talking about a being who supposedly has always been around and always will be around, you can't limit that to just this linear flow of life and creation and things of that nature. You know, it's a cycle, so it's very possible. Like just like how waves can be formed by air and then at the same time cause wind. You know what I'm saying? That goes to show you that there's a perpetual cycle that's involved with creation. All right. So on that note, we're gonna go ahead and jump to some more music. I'll be right back.
Now playing Blame Me by Nine's Gutta featuring Ryan Mathis.
It's just different.
but I just don't feel that. Things ain't the same, and it's clear that something's wrong, cause I'm lonely while you're right here. You're not the same as when I claimed you, baby, I swear. I'm sitting right here, but I'm out there. My mind's in the clouds, high above the stratosphere. You ruin things like in the rain when mascara smears. Went from singing in that rain to pain that hasn't healed. So now I'm staring through that window too for better view. And the grass and greener pastures seem so beautiful. See right now passionately passive how I'm viewing you. I just wanna love you like I used to. Change hit me sucking like a deuce. Snub nose, had my hands up. Why did you shoot? Suspecting you, expecting us to move new direction. Separate, guessing we lost our connection. Sync your Bluetooth.
You were my future, my whole life. And now it's just a memory. Nothing can separate us. Why you had to change on me? We're never gonna be alright. I'll forever be the same story. You already turned the page, yeah. But you can place the blame on me.
Are you insecure? Can't control what's in your mind? It ain't like the song, she really was a friend of mine. Listen, you know the biggest egos walk the thinnest lines. Still go weep into those people, now I can't simmer down. She know I be in the yo perfecting flow, doing shit. Always going back and forth, but not no more. Blew it, bitch. Probably got a problem like issues with your father might wanna tell him that his daughter sorry didn't do mama right. Therefore it's errors and judgment now affection like see. Obligation moves a man and fate can move a mountain. But tell me, what can move his heart and how you do without it? Look, love, the truth is that you scarred a little too neurotic. If this is us, then pull the plug, I'm canceling the pilot. If this is us, then who the fuck you trying to bring inside it? Those dirty words you blurt, they cut, I duck, it feels like violence. Won't get no rise out me, ace to the G, moving silence.
You were my future, my whole life. And now it's just a memory. Nothing can separate us. Why you had to change on me? We're never gonna be alright. I'll forever be the same story. You already turned the page, yeah. But you can place the blame on me. My whole life. Memories. We're never gonna be alright, be alright. Yeah.
Okay, and we're back. You're listening to Wind Clan Ninjas podcast, Book of Wind mini-series. I am C-Wind, reading the Book of Wind by myself, Stavario C-Wind Wyndham. Alright. Picking up where we left off. As waves crash against the shore and the rocks and cliffs along it, these formations wear down bit by bit. Trust me, doing anything over and over for 1,000,000 years will eventually wear anything or anyone down. These changes are permanent, but take so long that no one lives long enough to tell the difference. Storms, on the other hand, those guys can cause some noticeable damage really quickly. Storms form like any other wind, constituted by a mass movement of air. With storms, you have lots of air and oftentimes the convergence of multiple sources of wind coming together to form a very powerful force. This force is powerful enough to carry and toss around water to make rain. It's powerful enough to build up charges to create lightning, and as a result, thunder. Despite the tremendous force represented by storms, they always have the silver lining of being temporary. Some last minutes and some weeks, but they always leave just as surely as they came. Their damage, no matter how severe, can usually be repaired or rebuilt, at least with respect to man-made structures. Among the most powerful of storms is the hurricane, known as cyclones in the Pacific Ocean, where they also rotate the opposite direction. Hurricanes can grow to be several miles in diameter and are birthed in the tropics. That temperature difference we talked about earlier between the equator and poles causes great winds to develop, especially between the months of July and November, known as hurricane season. Starting out as tropical storms, they can grow in size by absorbing wind from other sources and by drawing in ocean water. A lot of times, these storms fizzle out or change direction before they can become too terrible. But once in a while, the storms become full-fledged hurricanes and make landfall on the coast. These bad boys are so vicious that scientists actually give them people names like Sandy and Hugo. The worst of these can produce winds strong enough to lift a person off their feet and throw them a few yards. They can uproot trees and tear down houses. The rains brought by these storms can cause floods, and hail the size of baseballs has even been reported. Hurricane Katrina, one of the most catastrophic hurricanes to touch the states, not only affected the landscape, but the entire way of life for the local people. A quick geography lesson for you. The city of New Orleans was built below sea level. So in order to live there, the people had to drain some of that swampland and then build levees to block water from moving back in. Naturally, they were accustomed to a certain level of flooding. However, when Katrina came along, there was so much rain that there was too much water for the levees to protect against, and major areas were flooded until they were entirely underwater. Many were killed, many were trapped for weeks, and many had to relocate to different cities having no home to go back to. I spoke to a Katrina survivor while I was in New Orleans with George Clinton and P-Funk. I'd heard about most of the things people endure down there, but I was amazed when she talked about the state of the water. There was a thick film over most of the surface due to oil refineries that were damaged in the storm. Downed power lines electrified many areas, but the most amazing and unexpected thing she mentioned was sharks. Yes, there were fucking 10 to 15 foot sharks in the water. Sharks moved further inland from the Gulf of Mexico. As you can see, the power of wind shifted all kinds of dynamics in this case. Hell, it even affected the political climate as the Bush administration began to take heat for slow and less than satisfactory response time to help victims. A prominent U.S. city was transformed into the Wild West as residents, now armed with assault weapons stolen from a nearby armory, began to open fire on the rescue helicopters from the roofs of their now sunken homes. Considering what that place has been through, they have since made a remarkable recovery. That's the difference in erosion and destruction. Erosion happens slowly but surely over a long period of time, usually long enough to where people don't see it coming or don't even notice anything is out of place. Destruction, however, is quick and apparent. The hurricane hit quick, and much of the physical damage has been repaired. But it was this same destruction that allowed us to notice the erosion. It exposed the erosion of our government's ability to aid its citizens in times of crisis after having spent so much time and effort to combat the erosion of foreign nations. It exposed the erosion of inner cities where the people cherish the little they have more than the wealthy appreciate their belongings, only to have it all snatched away with no human source to blame or hold accountable. It exposed the erosion of morals in some of these same poor people who, after enduring the hardships preceding the hurricane, were less than welcoming of any police or military presence, even if they were on rescue mission. You see, oftentimes destruction can be fixed because it is a clear, visible, agreeable cause, and thus an apparent solution. Erosion, on the other hand, is shrouded in theory, having taken so long to develop that any number of forces can be held accountable, and thus no one source takes the blame. The American legal system is perfectly suited to deal with single crimes after and as they are being committed in an obvious manner. It is, however, crippled in regards to addressing the underlying causes that lead to crime. That's why it's so hard to cure diseases versus viruses. Viruses present a clear enemy, a clear path of destruction, and thus a clear solution. A disease develops over time, And even though there are some apparent effects, it is difficult to pinpoint exactly what causes the disease or determine what, if any, other factors contributed to the development of the disease. HIV and AIDS are the only case in which it's the disease that is the hurricane and the virus the erosion. HIV is the clear source for AIDS, so to avoid getting AIDS, one simply has to avoid contracting HIV. HIV, however, has been shrouded in so much mystery as to where it originated that it has been a difficult battle attempting to find a cure. And some even speculate the virus was being developed by the government itself as a weapon. All right, and I find that pretty interesting, that part right there, because mind you, I wrote this back in let me see, end of 2013, early 2014, and this was before I actually got certified as a Qigong and Tai Chi instructor, so I dealt with at that point I learned the Eastern beliefs on where diseases, how they form and their causes for them, and they have a great way of accounting for the emotional component, that the energy that forms first before matter forms around it, creating a disease. And yeah, diseases are a process, so there isn't a miracle cure like you could just drink a serum or take a pill or take a shot or something like that and just get rid of something instantly, because the process by which the disease formed, the process by which cancer and things like that come about, they take years to develop. They take a long time to develop, and it's based on certain lifestyle choices, certain emotional impacts on the body. Like it's a whole number of factors that play into it, the formation of it over time, so it takes time to reverse. That process, just like any other process, can be reversed, but it's not going to be overnight. It's something that takes time and an overhaul of your lifestyle choices, but yeah, but that's the difference between destruction versus erosion, man. Destruction, you see what happened. You can turn it around. Erosion took so long, you don't even know if something's wrong because you're so used to it. All right. And on that note, we're gonna play another song. We got more music on this episode than usual. We're gonna try to get quite a bit in here, and this is a pretty long chapter, so it's a possibility this might be our last. This might be the last song, and then I'll do a little bit more, and then we'll finish this chapter next episode, and then go on to the next one. All right, I'll be right back.
Now playing Take You to My Hood by Seawind.
My hood, would you still be in love, baby? In love, baby. And if I take you to my hood, would you still be in love, baby? In love. Just cause niggas gas you and tell you how fresh your clothes is, don't mean your shit smell like roses. A bitch like you can get fucked in the hood, get knocked up and end up stuck in the hood, get high like Cuban Chris Tuck in the hood on Friday. Don't smoke, then don't look my way. She shaking in the coop, what you acting like a chicken for?
All I see around here is pawn shops and liquor stores.
A rich girl from deep in the valley, she ain't used to seeing homeless people sleeping in alleys. She ain't never bought a weave out of Sally's. She got that good hair, her people from the islands, from Cali to Tally, Sacktown to Mactown. Girl, you in the hood, better know how to act now. You gave me your heart, don't have a heart attack now. Lit a hood ninja, hit it from the back. If I take you to my hood, would you still be in love, baby? In love, baby. And if I take you to my hood, would you still be in love, baby? In love. Your mommy and your daddy gave you love and guidance. In my household, we had drugs and violence. On school nights, I bet you had good sleep and silence. I listened to the lullaby of police and sirens. So my vocab is nigga this, nigga that. But you still hit me up on Twitter trying to chitter chat. Talking about I don't talk right. What kind of shit is that? Come out of them suburbs to where the inner city's at. Come see the corner where unfortunate kiddies rap. Trying to get up out of the hood, but end up dealing crack. Can't get a connect, so they only selling nickel sacks of green. You listen to Green Day and Nickelback. But it's okay, we can still listen to Maxwell and kick a little something in the trap. Yeah, or bump one of them gay songs by Trey Songz while I give your ass something you can taste on. If I take you to my hood, would you still be in love, baby? In love, baby. And if I take you to my hood, would you still be in love, baby? In love, in love. Shorty say she like them boys in the hood, and them niggas that's up to no good. I'll break you off like a nigga should, for real, for real, for real, for real. Shorty say she like them boys in the hood, and them niggas that's up to no good. I'll break you off like a nigga should, for real, for real, for real, for real, for real. Yeah, my ninja, for real, for real, for real, for real, for real. Yeah, my ninja, for real, for real, for real, for real. If I take you to my hood, would you still be in love, baby? In love, baby. And if I take you to my hood, would you still be in love, baby? In love, in love. If I take you to my hood.
Alright, and I'm back. See Win with the Win Clan Ninjas podcast. Book of Win mini-series. Get that Book of Win on Amazon.com. And make sure you support us at Patreon.com/WinClanNinjas. Go ahead and grab up some of those rewards for helping support our show, supporting our music, supporting all things ninja. Haha. Alright, diving right into the book once again. Some believe that certain conditions can be observed and avoided in order to prevent disease. The same goes for weather. Using instruments like the Doppler radar, meteorologists, aka weathermen, can watch familiar patterns in wind currents and air pressure to predict future weather conditions. It's never an exact science, hence the so-and-so % chance of rain style weather reports. But as technology improves, so does the accuracy of the reports. Factors such as location play a role in this prediction as well, since some areas are more prone to certain weather conditions. Just as the tropics are prone to hurricanes, the Midwest United States is known for its affinity for another type of powerful storm, the tornado. Tornadoes are the result of the same factors that create wind that we mentioned earlier. When strong winds of differing temperatures and pressures collide, they battle it out to occupy the same space and move past one another. This clash causes the wind to rotate around each other and eventually create a strong vacuum in the center, and thus a tornado is born. Feeding on various sources of wind, the tornado can grow in size and power, funneling down from the clouds and touching down on land. Now, I don't know anything about them picking up your house and whisking you away to Oz for an adventure, but one with enough power will sure enough fuck up your neighborhood. Tornadoes tear down trees and rearrange the landscape a bit, but as far as storms go, tornadoes are the sworn enemy of man-made structures. The true power of tornadoes comes from the vacuum I mentioned. Since all air is forced out of the center and to the outside of the funnel by centrifugal force, the center struggles to replace this air, and thus anything in its path is sucked in. We're jumping the gun a little here because vacuums get into the discussion of the other two forces, mu and ku, that I mentioned in the beginning. But there's a great point to be derived here. When two opposing forces collide and struggle to find balance, a destructive force is created. Even when there's a difference of opinions, as the disagreement grows more heated, friends and families can be sucked into the middle. The lack of a good solution causes any and all solutions to rush to the center attempting to rectify it. Sometimes this can grow into an all-out war, and before you know it, peacemakers and shit starters alike are thrown into the fray. Disaster is left in their wake. After all is said and done, there's always this ice-cold calm as everyone recovers and plans on rebuilding. Escaping from storms like these really makes you pause for a moment and realize what's really important. Was it that house? Or was it the family you raised in it? Was it that hot button issue as election time rolls around? Or was it the citizens of the country you're trying to lead? Speaking of ice cold fronts aren't no joke either. Cold wind blows into an area from areas with characteristically low temperatures and sends a chill through any and everything. A little cold air in an area that is accustomed to it ain't so bad, but when you're talking about an area that is typically more warm and humid, the effects can be devastating beyond just simple discomfort. Extreme cold fronts have been known to kill livestock, freeze and destroy crops, and cause roads to be covered in ice. When you hear them talk about wind chill factor in the news, they're talking about what temperature it feels like when the wind is blowing. Though the actual temperature outside may be at one level, strong winds blowing through can make it feel several degrees colder outside. It's like blowing off your suit. As heat and thermal energy escapes a source, it can be blown away, causing the source to feel cooler. Liquids are highly receptive to this effect, which is why the body cools down faster when sweating. The sweat helps the heat disperse, and a nice gentle breeze makes the surface feel even cooler as the wind aids in dispersing this heat. But there's an obvious difference in the cooling effects of a gentle breeze on a hot summer day versus a cold front coming in and icing the orchards. Are you starting to notice a pattern in all this yet? Nobody ever has an issue with the overall force of the wind itself. It's the amount and result of which. Nobody cares when you take a sip of wine, but when you're drunk as hell, up on top of the bar doing the Tootsie Roll with your skirt hiked up, now you're an alcoholic and gotta go to AA meetings and shit. I guess it's the same with religion. Volunteering at the homeless shelter is cool, but when you start having holy crusades and burn down half of Europe in the name of God, all kinds of trouble is stirring. You're supposed to be bringing that cool breeze of peace to break through the heat and tension, but you're freezing crops and killing cattle instead. Great job, Charlemagne. And I know there's probably some young people listening to this right now. No, we're not talking about Charlemagne the God. He is named after King Charlemagne from hundreds of years ago. You got Google. There's no excuse for you to not know stuff in today's day and time. Just pick up your phone and Google the shit. I mean, it's right there. We used to have to go to libraries and learn the Dewey Decimal System and stupid shit like that when I was little. And then now you can just like pick up your phone like, oh, I want to know this. Look it up. Find out who the original Charlemagne was. Thank you. Anywho, okay, that's enough about cold. Let's talk about heat, baby. Let's hop on a camel's back and hump to the Sahara right quick. I'm talking about the desert, y'all. Now, the desert is the perfect setting for a conversation about how wind affects the environment. Before I continue, ain't it hot as hell out here, y'all? All right, back to the tour. Whew. You can surely bet that where there's lots of sand, there's lots of sandstorms. Strong winds kick up and carry large amounts of it all over miles of space. These storms are strong enough and frequent enough that the landscape can look 100% different from one day to the next. Hills are leveled and new slopes suddenly appear out of thin air. This makes naming landmarks almost useless in these areas, and neighboring cities with conditions tolerable enough to live have to put everything on pause for a moment as the sandstorm passes. These vast oceans of sand are an interesting contrast to oceans of water. Both are receptive to the change that winds bring about, but whereas life struggles to thrive in the desert, it flourishes in the ocean. Side note, it's said that just about every desert on Earth was once an ocean. Makes you think. Or that maybe that once that water dissipated and left behind that salt, things couldn't grow there. Moving along. There's life lurking in the ocean depths that we haven't even discovered yet. What's the difference in their makeup and the way they receive change that makes one more suitable for sustaining life? Both are made up of a collective of small particles that make up a large mass. However, the difference is in the bonds. Water molecules flow together seamlessly, passing through each other and connecting with others. They level themselves out when they come to rest to form an even surface. It's a kind of harmony that isn't shared by sand. Sand granules have the outward appearance of all being the same, but under a microscope, you can see that each grain is unique. They try their best to move around each other, but can never quite level out. When they are picked up and carried to another place, they maintain their individual identities and form new unique combinations and forms. Sand doesn't form bonds the way water does, so when the winds of change come along, it stirs the surface of both, but water always returns to balance. Waves form out of resistance, then submission to wind, while sand dunes come as a result of complete acceptance. Is it that too much and too frequent change make it difficult to sustain life? Furthermore, is it the tenacity of maintaining individuality in a body of similar but unique parts that causes such frequent change? Well, I suppose whereas one can only sustain a particular kind of life, the other can support only the most resilient forms of life. The oceans and the deserts meet halfway on the land most humans live on and create a more balanced mix of sustainability and changeability. While different forms of wind could come along and cause a great deal of change, everything works together to return to some sort of balance. It therefore not only sustains life, but improves the quality of the experience of life. It makes life more dynamic and pushes its limits of adaptability, promoting evolution. Alright, so yeah, we're nearing our hour mark here, so I'm going to go ahead and stop here and we'll continue with creatures and environment in our next episode. Once again, if you're an artist, keep on submitting music, windclanpodcast@gmail.com, and we'll feature you in the show. It's no cost to you, you know what I'm saying, give you a platform to get your music out there. You know, give us some entertaining stuff we can play for our listeners. But yeah, I've been C Wind, author of the Book of Wind. Go ahead and check that out on Amazon. Make sure you keep on supporting us on Patreon, and I'll see you next time. Peace.